just when she thought she was winning, the FBI reopens its probe into Hillary Clinton's emails and her handling of classified information.
The FBI has just sent a letter to Congress informing them that they have discovered new emails.
Good evening. In the last hour, the US presidential race has seen a major twist. The FBI is again investigating Hillary Clinton and her use of a private email system when she was Secretary of State. And even though it could all amount to nothing, it will be manna from heaven for Donald Trump, who keeps calling her Crooked Hillary, the woman he wants to put in jail. Also tonight, Uber loses a landmark case that forces it to treat drivers as employees and give them rights to holiday and sickness pay. After years of negotiation, Antarctica will become home to the world's largest marine sanctuary. And from apartheid to liberation, we meet the new South African artist Mary Sibande, whose radical work is going on display in Britain. After the news at 7:30, Unreported World is in Vietnam, where people are still suffering from America's use of Agent Orange in herbicidal warfare. Well, breaking news tonight, within the last hour, the FBI has revealed it will reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. The FBI Director, James Comey, said a separate case had uncovered emails which appeared to be pertinent to the investigation. A few moments ago, Donald Trump hailed the announcement at his rally in New Hampshire. Let's go to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie.
Well, Krish, this is a hand grenade being thrown into the US presidential race just 11 days ahead of the election. It goes back to Hillary Clinton's use of that private email server, as you described. She was investigated over that, over concern that she might have shared classified material. The investigation went on for more than a year. Finally, the FBI, about 6 months ago, came out. She was criticised roundly for her use of that server. She was described as acting carelessly, but there were no grounds for prosecution, according to their conclusion at that point. Fast forward to today, Hillary Clinton's in a very strong position in the polls. She's feeling very confident, and suddenly, unexpectedly, out of nowhere, certainly no one on Capitol Hill saw this coming. Roger Comey, the FBI director, sends a letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee, so the people who were investigating her in the first place. I think we've got a quote from the letter that he sent. He says, in connection with an unrelated case, the FBI has learned of the existence of emails that appear to be pertinent to the investigation. I agree the FBI should take appropriate steps designed to allow investigators to review these emails to determine whether they contain classified information, as well as to assess their importance to our investigation. Now, we've had no comment directly from Hillary Clinton as yet. Everyone was caught by surprise. She is on a plane in Cedar Rapids, but certainly Donald Trump, as we've heard, has reacted very swiftly. He's in New Hampshire. This is manna from heaven for his campaign. He sounds jubilant. He is thrilled. He is gleeful. Let's hear a little more of what he's said.
Hillary Clinton's corruption is on a scale we have never seen before. We must not let her take her criminal scheme into the Oval Office.
Now, Kylie, Hillary Clinton has continually been able to say, I've been investigated and there was no case to answer. She can't say that anymore. What kind of impact is that going to have?
I mean, the stunning thing is to me that suddenly we've already heard from Donald Trump on this, and we've yet to hear from her. She's been criticised in the past for lacking transparency, that, you know, it would have been better if there had already been some kind of a statement. She's defended herself in the past by saying, well, in fact, yes, it happened. She regretted it. She wished she hadn't used that email server. I mean, the relief in the campaign when the FBI wrapped up its investigation without recommending any prosecution was immense. So suddenly, you know, this close to the election, the polls are already open. You know, 17 million Americans have already cast their votes. And here they are dealing with this issue again. I mean, the shocking thing is that if somehow she manages to ride this out and eventually does make it into the White House, she will enter the White House under investigation by the FBI. It's an extraordinary development, and there is scrambling in both campaigns now to try and explain and make the most of what's happened.
Thanks, Kylie. Now, it's a landmark ruling which could affect hundreds of thousands of workers after a tribunal declared that drivers for the taxi app Uber should have the right to holiday pay, breaks and a minimum wage. The judges dismissed claims by the company that drivers were effectively their own bosses. But what implications will the judgment have for the modern British labour market, known as the gig economy? Kieran Jenkins reports.
You don't see this often.
Alex, can you hear me?
I can hear you. We've got the judgment.
Yes.
We won on all counts.
Oh, excellent. Wonderful.
A victory for workers over big business.
Oh, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
For the drivers of Uber, it's a seminal moment.
Basically, they've got workers' rights, and this is a kind of a big thing because that should duplicate throughout the country. This means social quality of life for individuals that frankly didn't have it before.
My name's Christina, and I drive with Uber because it gives me the time to spend with my son.
Uber, as they'd like you to see it, is an app that connects drivers with passengers. Sign up, drive your car, make some money on the side. And this is the Uber the ads don't show. In a recent investigation, we found drivers working almost non-stop.
Weekly, I do put in about 70 hours.
I don't see my kids, I don't see my wife.
Drivers who claim they earn less than the minimum wage. So that's you going to work for Uber?
Yes.
And all the while, Uber says it's nothing like a minicab company.
Oh, that's me. Hello.
It's just a piece of tech, and its drivers are self-employed. Well, Asif certainly doesn't feel self-employed.
The minute I open the app, I am not self-employed. I am following their directions. They are controlling the business coming through to me via them. They are controlling the price. They are controlling the details of the passengers.
2 Uber drivers put this to the test. Today, an employment tribunal ruled they were not self-employed. They should be given the rights of workers, which could mean
sick pay, minimum wage, and pension, and all these kind of things, which we were the partners before without none of these things.
Uber's 40,000 UK drivers could now make similar claims. It would be a fundamental change from contractors working job by job to workers receiving the national living wage.
Well, not for nothing is this being called a landmark ruling. Uber are by no means the only company that's been operating in this way. And today's ruling opens the door to claims from workers in many more industries.
From couriers and cleaners to takeaway deliverers.
There are a lot of people, quite clearly, who are working full-time for that particular entity. They're subject to control by that entity. They're pretty much like employees. The potential for claims is enormous.
Uber said tens of thousands of people in London drive with Uber precisely because they want to be self-employed and their own boss. The overwhelming majority of drivers who use the Uber app want to keep the freedom and flexibility of being able to drive when and where they want. Uber intends to appeal. For drivers like Asif, celebrations may have to wait for now.
Well, we're joined now by 2 Uber drivers, James Farah, one of the claimants in the tribunal, and Stephen Rowe, who supports the status quo and likes being self-employed. James, Uber says you're in the minority.
Yes, they'd say that, but we're not. We've been involved with the GMB union. We were very fortunate to have GMB support this, and we've talked to a lot of drivers. We've done a lot of research on this, and we've even done surveys that show that 83% of drivers are no longer even able to support basic family income needs on their current wage. So yes, Uber says this, but the reality is not there. And even if you take Uber's top driver earning statistics and you work them down, they still work out at below minimum wage.
Stephen, why don't you want minimum wage and holiday pay and sickness?
Because I want to be self-employed, and because the Uber app lets me do that. It lets me decide when I want to work, how long I want to work, gives me total flexibility, enables me to do other things alongside driving, and I think it's fantastic.
And you think that would go if you became an employee?
Well, listen, I can't even conceive how they would make it work. I mean, an analogy is possibly telling Airbnb that they have to guarantee tenants to every person who puts a property on.
James?
It's kind of a ridiculous analogy to bring it up with Airbnb. Look, what we need is a level playing field. Now, this judgment is emphatic. The judge said that the contracts that we've signed are fictions, they use twisted language, they're faintly ridiculous. I mean, these are very strong words coming from a judge.
Why did you sign up, though, if you didn't like the deal?
Well, I do like the deal. I like the flexibility. What I'm not prepared to accept is that my labour should be exploited and that I have to work in unsafe conditions because the market is...
But what about Stephen's point that employees don't have flexibility? You know, you'll end up having hours and you'll have to work, 46 weeks a year or whatever it is, 9 till 5 or whatever it might be, whatever the company decides. Once you're an employee, they own you.
Well, that's a good point. But let's be clear. We are not seeking employment status. We're seeking worker status. So that means we are self-employed with worker protections. We are entitled to those worker protections because of the level of control that Uber has over our working relationship.
So he wants you to have your cake and eat it. What's wrong with that?
You took the words from my mouth. I was just about to say
what's wrong with that?
Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I mean, I think that Uber... I don't think it exploits anybody. The terms that you work on there are the same as across the industry. It's about an 80-20 split. Most minicab companies, it would be the same sort of split, but you would have to work specific shifts. You'd have to guarantee what days you work. The whole point about Uber is that you're the boss in terms of deciding when you want to work, and that's what it's about.
Now, this case is just two of you at the moment, but I mean, do you think this blows apart the whole gig economy?
Well, no, there's two of us that are the test case. There's 25 stacked behind us, and there is tens of thousands of others and hundreds of thousands
and lots of other
workers.
taxi companies
that's right.
Deliveroo and everyone else.
I want to pick up on a point that Stephen made about the rest of the industry. This is the way it works. The rest of the industry is rotten. Uber went before the Greater London Assembly in 2014 and said that this trade is brutally exploitative. It is. It still is. But after today's ruling...
So why do so many people want to work in it?
A lot of people don't have a choice. There are a lot of low-paid workers who are exploited in this town. It's gone on for decades. And the mayor, successive mayors, politicians have turned a blind eye. We are publicly licensed people, and we have not gotten any protection as publicly licensed people from public licensing authorities.
Stephen, what do you say to that?
I just don't see where it's exploitative. And the only way that you could get higher money is for the fares to be put up, and then you'd be the same as a black cab, which are hugely expensive and are pricing them, I mean, so...
But you've heard all those drivers saying, we work X number of hours, we don't take home, we're taking £5 an hour back.
I use Uber often as a passenger, and when I use it as a passenger, I speak to the drivers. I have not met one driver who wasn't happy with what he was doing, who wasn't taking home decent money. I just haven't met any.
Do you live in different universes or something? I mean, he's saying everybody agrees with him.
Listen,
you're saying everyone agrees with you.
I'd love to take Stephen out with me for a day or two. Stephen has been sent down here by Uber. There are thousands of Uber drivers.
Is that true?
Have
you spoken to Uber? Have you spoken to the Uber management about coming on here or anything like that?
I've made it clear to... Well, you're here because the GMB wants you here.
I'm here because I'm a lead claimant in this case.
I've made it clear over a long time ago, actually last November, that I think Uber is a great company and is a good company to work for. If you don't want to be if you don't want to be self-employed, go and get a job at a company which gives you a fixed income.
I suspect this one's going to go to the Supreme Court, so I imagine you'll be coming back here for years. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, rebel forces have launched a counterattack in the Syrian city of Aleppo in a second attempt to break the government siege. The insurgents have bombarded the western part of the city, leaving at least 15 civilians dead. But tonight, the Russian president rejected calls to resume airstrikes in eastern Aleppo, which have been on hold for the last 10 days. Diana Magnay has the latest.
And so it begins. Prayers before the onslaught. Fighters united by their hatred of the Syrian regime, readying themselves for an assault on rebel-held eastern Aleppo. Weapons aplenty, and a readiness to fight to the last.
We want to storm their positions. We're just waiting for orders from our emir. We're not frightened of their bullets or their ammunition. The order to attack just came in.
The bewildering array of rebel groups who fight the Assad regime, today united. The lengths they're prepared to go, this bunch of suicide bombers, some of whom look like teenagers, a sign of how radical much of the rebel opposition is. This video from Fatah al-Sham, formerly al-Nusra, al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria. Suicide bombers heading towards government lines. Two of many today, armour bolted onto all manner of vehicles to make sure their deadly load hits its target. The rebels are pushing in from the west and have managed to take some territory already. Here you can see fighters from the so-called Asham Legion running in through the Al-Assad district, heavily fought over for the last 4 years, which is why it's such a wasteland. There's also fighting further north. Vehicles jammed with fighters moving triumphantly towards the front line from earlier this morning. A carefully choreographed media campaign to accompany this rebel assault. And Nayrab Airport to the east of the city, also under attack from rebel positions in the south. Grad missiles directed against the airport, where the regime brings in men and arms. And in the government-held west of the city, the hospitals fill up. The innocents caught in this latest assault. 15 civilians dead so far, no doubt there will be more. In the rebel-held east, some celebrate. Even if their would-be liberators have jihadists in their ranks, they feel they're their only way out from the purgatory of siege. As Russia moved a naval destroyer down from Crimea to join its warships in the Mediterranean, President Putin said he'd hold off on fresh airstrikes. Time enough, he suggested, for the US to separate the extremists from the moderates. On Syria's complex battlefield, as with everything in this war, that is easier said than done.
Well, in Iraq, reports claim that thousands of citizens in Mosul are being abducted and used as human shields by Islamic State militants in their effort to slow down the advance of Iraqi security forces towards the city. Amidst a growing humanitarian crisis as people in neighbouring towns and villages flee, today the UN said IS fighters killed at least 232 people in Mosul on Wednesday for either refusing to follow orders or for being allied to Iraqi security forces.
ISIL's depraved, cowardly strategy is to attempt to use the presence of civilian hostages to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations, effectively using tens of thousands of women, men, and children as human shields. Many of those who refused to comply were shot on the spot.
Here, the government's under mounting pressure to release a letter which is thought persuaded the car giants Nissan to expand their UK operations. Ministers have been accused of striking an undisclosed deal, convincing the firm to stay in Sunderland following the Brexit vote. Well, our reporter Paul McNamara is in Westminster, so what more do we know?
Well, to be honest with you, Chris, not very much, and therein lies the rub. In fact, for the most of today, Downing Street hasn't even admitted to sending a letter, simply saying that we are continuing to communicate with Nissan through a variety of different forms. Now, the Department of Business have been a lot more open about it. One of the sources there said there definitely is a letter. They've no idea why Downing Street aren't just admitting to it. But that's where their openness ends. There's no detail as to what is in this letter. All they've said to us is that they have ensured we will keep the UK competitive. What does that mean? Nobody seems to know. No one here seems to know. We spoke to Ian Wright, the chair of the Energy, Business and Industrial Strategy Committee this afternoon. This is what he had to say.
A couple of weeks ago, the boss of Nissan was saying that they would stall any potential new investment in the Sunderland plant unless specific guarantees were given. Now, what are the nature of those guarantees? Has cash, either directly or indirectly, being given to Nissan? And is it going to be just for that specific company, or is it going to be for that wider sector? I do think other companies, and actually taxpayers, need to know this as well.
Now, not everyone is upset about this. Britain's biggest car manufacturer, Jaguar Land Rover, have welcomed it, as have their engine suppliers, Ford. But then they also said they too need assurances that they are not going to be held to higher tariffs now that they're trading with Europe. And that is Theresa May's problem now. Has she set a precedent that she will be held to by every other company that trades with Europe?
Thanks, Paul. Now, if the last UKIP leader didn't want the job, there are plenty who do. The latest contender is Nigel Farage's former chief of staff, Raheem Kassam. The party has been beset by infighting, and many are questioning whether Mr Kassam is the right man to heal it. His social media posts are littered with offensive and derogatory remarks about fellow politicians, including some of his own colleagues. Here's our political correspondent, Michael Crick, and a warning: his report contains flash photography from the start.
He's just 30, hugely inexperienced, and never been elected to anything in his life. Yet Raheem Kassam, launching in a pub today, out-Faraging Farage, some might say, presents himself as the true heir.
I regard myself as the Faragist candidate. Of the Faragists, I am the Faragest. Our legacy is Nigel, Nigel is our legacy, and we shouldn't be trying to drag this party to the squishy centre ground.
But he lacks Farage's stature, and Farage would never read from a text taped to beer pumps. Kassam's background and slogan suggest links with Donald Trump.
Do you see yourself as the British Trump?
No, I see myself as the British Raheem.
But he shares much of Trump's belligerence and laddishness. Scores of his comments on social media in recent months have been astonishingly abusive. During the ITV referendum debate in June, Kassam tweeted,
"Can someone just, tape Nicola Sturgeon's mouth shut? And her legs, so she can't reproduce? Thanks."
You said it on Twitter.
Yep.
Can someone just tape Nicola Sturgeon's mouth shut and her legs so she can't reproduce?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I gave a speech just now, Michael, and I said I apologise for any genuine offence I've caused for offensive things like that.
What kind of mind is it that writes that?
I'll tell you what it is, Michael. I've worked in what one might call shock jock journalism for a while, right? And that was in the middle of a debate. It was half a year ago, and it was certainly before I knew about her miscarriages.
In March, when current leadership candidate Suzanne Evans lost her appeal against suspension from UKIP, he tweeted,
"Now off for good."
On Facebook in July, he called UKIP's sole MP Douglas Carswell a four-letter word starting with T. And last February, he tweeted the journalist Sunny Hundal,
"I just offered a 10k bet. You scared? OK, 20k. Come on, you loudmouth, pidgin English-speaking."
But aren't these the tweets of a drunken lout rather than somebody who aspires to be leader of the opposition, as you were just saying now? Were you drunk when you wrote any of these?
No, I wasn't.
You weren't drunk, so you haven't even got that excuse.
No, I wasn't, Michael. Michael, I'm not trying to make an excuse for it, right? I'm saying they're wrong.
And they're not that long ago, these tweets, are they?
So it was 6 months ago, yeah. I'm saying we should move on. I'm saying I'm happy to mature and happy to grow up and realise what I've done was incorrect and morally wrong.
For many politicians, tweets like that would be fatal. But UKIP doesn't go by the normal rules of politics. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
Antarctica will become home to the world's largest marine sanctuary after years of international negotiation. Delegates from 24 countries, plus the EU, described the Ross Sea as the polar Garden of Eden, a vast area rich in wildlife and natural resources, which should be protected from commercial fishing. Asad Beg reports.
Free to roam this pristine part of the Antarctic, the Ross Sea has now been designated a marine protected area, which means it won't have any commercial fishing for 35 years. It wasn't easy getting here. It took 24 countries and the EU 5 years to agree to it, including Russia and China. The 600,000 square miles of the Ross Sea makes up just 2% of the Southern Ocean, but it boasts an environment which is rich in biodiversity, home to 38% of the world's Adelie penguins and around 6% of the world's population of Antarctic minke whales. One man that's been campaigning to protect these seas is the United Nations patron of the oceans, Lewis Pugh. To highlight the importance of this Antarctic sea, he swam in sub-zero temperatures of the Ross Sea, donning nothing but a pair of trunks. Having survived the experience, he helped persuade the Russians to sign up to the agreement.
So my dream is that this has set a precedent, and a really, really important precedent, that not only will we get more marine protected areas around Antarctica in the Southern Ocean, but also we'll look to the Indian Ocean, to the Pacific Ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean, and start creating marine protected areas in the high seas there. At the moment, they're largely unprotected, and that needs to change.
The Southern Ocean as a whole produces 3/4 of the nutrients that sustain life in the rest of the world's oceans. And now scientists will have access to part of the protected area to carry out studies on the effects of climate change.
It allows us to see what effects the climate change is having on the ocean, in addition to acting as a reserve, a protected area that would allow the ocean to build resilience.
There are hopes that this agreement will be replicated in other parts of the world, such as the Arctic seas around the North Pole. A memorandum of understanding has been signed here by the fishing industry not to fish in the newly exposed waters opened up by receding sea ice. But the memorandum was non-binding. With the added commercial opportunities such as drilling for oil and gas, it's not hard to understand why countries are hesitant to sign up to a similar agreement here.
Now, from apartheid to liberation, South Africa's recent history is a tale of seismic transformation. But along with political movements, artists have also been responding to issues of identity and meaning in the post-colonial age, like Mary Sibande, who's created sculptures of her alter ego, a domestic worker called Sophie. She finds refuge in dreaming of a future where she no longer has to subsist by cleaning other people's homes. The work is part of a new exhibition at the British Museum. I went down to meet Mary Sibande and Sophie.
I went to visit my grandmother. She started telling me about her younger years and telling me about being a maid, her servitude years. And while we were talking, and I realized, like, this is it. This is it. This is part of our history as South Africans. And for me, I wanted to share that history because a lot of black women relate to this story. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to tell this story. And that's how Sophie became.
So tell me a little bit about the details of Sophie, because she's obviously wearing an old-fashioned maid's dress.
While I was collecting these stories from my grandmother, and I realized there was this common denominator, aspiration. She wanted to be a nurse, but of course, being a black woman in South Africa during those times, she couldn't get any education or a degree. Sophie closes her eyes and she dreams, and whatever she dreams of becomes possible. The purple figure represents me. So now it's the new and the old facing each other. I want to destroy the body, deconstruct the body. And I wanted to zoom into Sophie. And that's why these creatures, they kind of represent embryos, something that when you zoom into something like an organic thing.
And purple from the purple shall govern.
Yes. In old Europe, if someone is wearing purple garb or purple attire, it's either they're clergy or they are rich, because purple dye was expensive in those days. And I thought, wow, this is it. Because my grandmother thinks I'm a superstar and she thinks that I'm the world's greatest artist. So I thought, well, I want to take that narrative of me being special and of course also link it with South Africa. There was a march that happened in Cape Town in 1985. So people were marching against apartheid. Apartheid police laced their water cannons with purple dye. The police wanted to mark people and arrest them afterwards. So in my head, I envisioned this sea of purple people. From there emerged the purple figure, and that is me. It's the new and the old on the same stage. Since 1992, South Africa has been going through a lot of changes. And of course, change is the violent process. And you can kind of see that on this work. The work insinuates violence, but at the same time, it also looks like a dance, like a celebration of something.
I mean, you're a child of the new South Africa.
Yes.
Free South Africa.
Yeah.
How much do you feel South Africa has moved beyond those initial stages of being free now?
I think it's baby steps. It's too early to tell because right now it's been 25 years since democracy. Issues that people were fighting for during apartheid, they still linger to this day. And I think it would take centuries to actually bury those skeletons. Right now, students are protesting, and this has been happening throughout the years. But during Mandela time, I remember there was a speech that he did. People were carrying rocks to throw and fight, and then he said, well, let's build houses with those rocks. It feels like there's something boiling that will explode anytime. And I think maybe the students are feeling that, and hence why these protests are becoming violent.
How easy has it been for young South Africans to think differently? Because there was such a sort of a dominant way of thinking after the end of apartheid. Everybody was the same politically, everybody was ANC, everyone had to think about the country in the same way.
I feel like it's a burden. For me, I have to perform. I have to be better than my grandmother, than my mother. And not in a negative way, but I feel like I have to perform. I have to live their dreams.
Mary Sibandi, tonight's main news. The FBI has reopened its investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server after finding additional emails it said could be pertinent. While we've been on air, Mrs. Clinton arrived at a campaign event in Iowa, but has made no comment as she got off the plane. Donald Trump gleefully welcomed the announcement at his campaign rally tonight. In a moment, we'll have the latest unreported world, but first, let's take a look at the weather.